It's the Star Wars Imperial Troop Transporter that you put together. Batteries not included. Stormtrooper sold separately.
What's that?
It's my troop transporter. It makes 5 more sounds, too.
R2-D2, where are you?
There's the laser cannon, stun gun, and stormtrooper.
Did he say that?
Oh, Dad.
Star Wars Imperial Troop Transporter. Stormtrooper sold separately. New from Kenner.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Geekfest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone, and joining me today I have James. Say hi, James.
Hello, everybody.
We are here once again in an undisclosed location at the Vault, where James keeps all of his Star Wars toys. We are doing part 3 of our vintage Star Wars toy special, specifically Kenner. As we've mentioned on 2 previous shows, Kenner is the gateway drug, if you will, into the toy market, the crazy, never-ending toy market, that is. And James has gracefully allowed us to come back here again and dig through his bins of toys. And it's interesting because, as I mentioned before, not only are we going to be able to look at like the differences, not only in how they make them now and how they used to make them, how we first saw them, but even between the different films, the different 3 Star Wars films, you get to see a progression of how some of these toys, technologically advanced from the original Star Wars films to Empire to Jedi, extra features, more detail, and that sort of thing. And, unfortunately, as the movies progressed, by the time you get to Jedi, you don't get that huge, gigantic volume of material, but the stuff they put out quality-wise was like probably some of the best one around. So, James, let's start by you dipping into your Santa Claus sack, if you will, and coming up with something we can talk about.
Well, I like to regale people with my stories of how my toy collection is a lot like the warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark and then in the beginning of Crystal Skull. But it's a smaller version of that. And instead of wooden boxes, I have a lot of Rubbermaid and whatever variation of Rubbermaid there is. Mm-hmm. But as we've shown in the past, there's just tons of stuff. I forget about stuff. It surprises me. Going through it, I just found one of the original 1977 or 8 Star Wars beach towels that had like the early artwork, like the Hildebrandt artwork and stuff. So I've even surprised myself a little bit. But what I've done on this particular episode is I've pulled out some of the second tier type of things.
Okay.
Last time, I think we stuck with mostly the big ships, the Falcon, the Death Star, the main character type things. But here, I've gone into now some of these second string players. For instance, the Darth Vader TIE Fighter. Now, I love the packaging. The most impressive part of my collecting of Star Wars, I just love the silver Star Wars logo and the pictures on it. Sometimes they showed some goofy kid playing. I guess that proved to a parent that, yes, see kids play with this. It's not just a collector item or something. I guess, they didn't really make these kind of ships before Star Wars.
Now, some of the more important features about this particular toy, just like a regular TIE Fighter, is the fact that you could eject as a result of getting hit.
Yeah, well, it doesn't... Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to step on you. I thought you were going to say, like, eject the figure.
No.
The figure just rises. The seat rises. But, yeah, you can eject the wings to simulate, like, an explosion. And, of course, there's the ever-popular sound and laser light, which really was just a grinding. Yeah, there's a couple AA batteries, which, now everything has AA.
Remember, another thing that's really interesting about these toys is that something we never got to see during the film, but we saw pictures or drawings of how exactly they would work, because we never saw these things land anywhere. We never saw them being stored anywhere unless you really, really paid close attention to some of the mad paintings. And a ship like a TIE Fighter or Darth Vader's advanced TIE Fighter, from what I understand, they never touch the ground. Like, the wings don't touch the ground. They're basically grappled onto some kind of a scaffolding.
Well, it's funny you mentioned
grabbing
that
the arms.
You do see them hanging later in Return of the Jedi when the Tidarium is coming in. You see,
but
just
they're like
kind of widescreen. You see them hanging.
Yeah, it's really hard to see them.
But they did make a model version of this, the TIE Fighter, the TIE Interceptor, and there was landing gear. The model did come with a landing gear.
Really?
Yeah. So you have to assume there has to be some alternate landing, because clearly it couldn't land on the wings.
You crush the wings.
But you figure if a guy had to make a landing, it's either fly or crash. They might not really care if their pilots made it or not.
Wow. You know what's another amazing thing about this toy is the fact that if you look at underneath, there's like real screws
Yeah.
You know, again, for its time, it was advanced. It's the advanced tie-ins. But there's certain things that they just hadn't perfected at that time. Hiding the screws was something that, you know, it's like, hey, be grateful with what you have.
I have to think that at this point in the collection, this was one of the first times they might have done colored plastic. Wow. Because everything else was relatively white before that. No, that's a lie. There was the land speeder was the correct color and stuff like that. Because the Millennium Falcon, the original TIE Fighter, and the original X-Wing were molded in white, like actual just white with stickers to give the detail.
Darth Vader's TIE Interceptor.
It looks close to what it should
it's
be,
It's a dark, nice, dark gray. Another thing I noticed here, and I think you can probably correct me on this, Kenner was owned by General Mills?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And also, I think, which had a subsidiary of General Foods. I think we'll look that up if we're not sure, but that's why they had so many tie-ins with the General Foods style cereals.
Wow, this is amazing. You even have a serial number on this specific toy in the bottom, and it says Cincinnati, Ohio. I guess that was
their headquarters.
And an actual stamped serial number and almost like an etched serial number underneath, like very detailed.
That one's very rare. That's why.
This is great.
I think I remember hearing stories from people in the 90s, maybe even the early 2000s, whenever Kenner kind of wrapped up and became officially Hasbro, because Hasbro's in Pawtucket, I believe, in Rhode Island. And I think they actually had offices in Cincinnati when they were Kenner for design and for models, things like that. And I have a feeling a lot of people found a lot of gems when they were wrapping up. People who worked there. I know things have made it to the collector market that were kind of called mock-ups or a 3/4 instead. So they were like almost a larger size that they would make a mold of or a clay figure of. And then a lot of, and then they plasticized it.
Well, I used to hear stories where people would go dumpster diving at the back of the factories
to find printout boxes.
Right, or prototypes and stuff like that. And that's how sometimes
that does exist. People really do have that.
Now let's talk a little bit about, I'm not sure if we touched upon this before. A lot of the times when you bought these larger boxes, they would come with these little catalogs of the rest of the collection.
These things were fantastic in their day. This was your want list. There's no internet. There's nothing but maybe a catalog, maybe the Sears or JCPenney catalog to show you what toys are out there. Or you saw them at the store or you didn't. These would show you what's available, what's coming soon.
Right, no actual release dates, but the material is there.
But they would show you all the action figures at first. Then they would show you what ships and play sets were available or coming soon. And then the large size. And then some other. In the beginning, when Star Wars was much fresher and the amount of toys weren't as plentiful, they had things that would tie in with some of their other lines. Kenner had dip dots. So sometimes you'd have Star Wars dip dots, which was a painting set. It's not color by number, but you would have like 5 or 6 colors. You dip your brush in. And then some of the other sets were like the Give a Show projector. And some of the other sets after that. You have the movie viewer, which was a big thing in Kenner's line, which you'd put this little cartridge in the back of a thing that looked like an old-fashioned kind of crank camera, and you'd watch scenes, either cartoon forms of the scenes or actual clips of a short 5-minute scene or less. But there's also the toothbrush, which I had. Nobody can miss out on the SSP vintage vans from the 70s that you'd pull the string and they'd take off and do ramps and stuff, but with the Star Wars artwork and on the side and the back.
If this van is rocking, don't bother knocking.
That's correct. And then last, definitely not least, the bop bag. Now, I don't know what a bop bag could be now, but back then it was basically one of these clown type bags that you'd punch and it had a little bit of a weight or sand at the bottom and it'd come back at you. Why you want to punch R2? I'll never know.
Even their advertisements, I remember, for their lightsabers at the time, which were those hollowed out plastic things that would just hum.
Just so you know, the hollowed out ones were the good ones. The real ones were basically a flashlight handle, and it was an inflatable. It was an inflatable tube, like a beach ball.
I don't remember those. I only remember the hollowed out ones.
And then it lit up just yellow. And exciting play action, it says on the package. I wasn't that excited. I went
with a little Photoshop.
I went with the bootleg. And my parents, I had a blue one, and my brother had the red one.
Those
it almost looked like a flashlight handle.
Yeah.
And you screw on the top and put they had a little colored gel. The 70s.
A much simpler time. Well, here's something I never noticed before, or maybe I just forgotten about. The back of the catalog has Butch and Sundance, the early days action figures.
They did that. That movie, I believe, came out either in late 78 or 79. And Kenner had the rights to that. So they made figures, which I do have, ironically.
Oh, my God.
I do have the figures. And I don't know if you recall the Indiana Jones line. You pressed a button on his back, and it was like a draw
spring mechanism.
It made his arm snap like you were pulling a gun on a draw. And what happens is the Butch and Sundance figures had them. I think the actors were actually like Tom Berenger and William Catt, who William Catt was eventually in Greatest American Hero.
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's who the early year Butch and Sundance, because they were young actors at the time. But besides that, some of those molds are copies of other things. Star Wars never really copied a design because it was so different. But I think we might have mentioned this, but the Ewok Village became something from Robin Hood with
Prince of
Kevin
Thieves.
Costner.
Yep.
And some of the Indiana Jones things. I think one of the Indiana Jones vehicles might have been, and horses, though definitely the horses were more like the Butch and Sundance line.
And even Star Wars copied itself.
Eventually.
When it comes to things like the droid factory set in the Jabba's
That's
palace,
true, yes.
which we'll talk about later.
They did use some of the same base molds.
What else you got?
We might have mentioned this in the past. EU seems to be something newer from the book line and the figure line, the video games, the EU, Expanded Universe, if people don't really know exactly what that is. Well, let me tell you, EU's been around for a long time, and I have a feeling that the people at Kenner wanted to make some other things, and even Lucas might have had some designs, and they said, oh, well, can we do something with that? Or Lucas might have said, hey, can you do something with this? And around the time when they were doing the Christmas special and some other thing, they tippy-toed into the EU waters, and they came up with this thing called the Imperial Troop Transporter. Now, it looks like something that might be floating around in the Death Star or something that could be planet-side, and it's a little silly. It's got a cockpit type of thing for a couple figures, and the drawing of the box has like the Death Squad commander driving. And then they have these canisters, or they almost look like garbage pails, that the figures would stand in, and I guess they would move them to another location. If it was the desert, they could hover faster. It's supposed to be a hover type thing. Well, what was magnificent about this toy was it had real sounds. Once you put the batteries in, it had 6 sounds approximately, and one of them was the real laser, like the Ben Burt laser sound, and a couple other ones where I think stormtroopers talking, and
Wow.
there is a little book inside.
It actually looks like something out of Battlestar Galactica.
There's a little book inside, which definitely makes it EU. It's basically an animated drawn story about the troop transporter with a picture of Darth Vader giving orders to the troops to go down to Tatooine. And inside it explains what we would assume is them on Tatooine. They didn't just get around on a dewback. They're the Empire. I mean,
those things walk pretty slow.
They might have used the dewback because it was there, but remember how they said, Ben Kenobi said, oh, the Sand People didn't shoot at the at the Sandcrawler, that these shots are too precise for this alleges that this troop transporter happened upon the Sandcrawler.
And they blow it up.
And that did the damage.
Now, do you remember in any form of EU or comics or anything, anybody adapting this to be used to make it more legitimate?
I feel like I saw this in a comic book, like a Star Wars comic. And, I couldn't be sure. I'd have to look it up. We could look that up on eBay. It says here the sounds are the sounds of the machine hovering itself. An R2-D2 sound. A C-3PO. A stormtrooper speaking. And then 2 different types of guns. A hand rifle. And the cannons that are on top of this thing. And what they did was they had these little compartment in the back you could hide droids, which would also put the sound on. And they had these little things that you'd put over a figure's head that was almost like it was incapacitating them, like a restraining bolt, but for humans or for, other types of creatures or beings. And it's not that bad. For a toy that really had no purpose, it's not terrible. They made it seem imperial enough that you could believe the Empire could have it.
Oh, okay.
And it made it seem usable enough that it was just another vehicle that you could put your figures on.
Wow. Very simple in design. You can actually see through the bottom the electronics a little bit. And again, you have the thick, heavy screws that I guess the batteries go on top. But you got to remove this entire piece, or maybe this piece here.
It seems to me now there's terms like MIDI and stuff like that. I don't know what exactly they used to record these. But sound had not been something new by the time Star Wars had come out in a toy.
Right.
G.I. Joe, I believe, had some toys that had like, let's go, guys, or some kind of militaristic type of talking. But I think this little book, which I have to imagine is very rare.
Yeah.
You don't see these floating around. It's almost like if you're an EU guy, you better find this, even if you don't find the toy that goes with it, because your collection's not quite complete.
Like, I could picture this in the film. You know what I mean? Even though it's an EU design, it almost kind of fits what they normally would pick to put in here. And yeah, you had, 6 different sound activations.
And I just love the sound. Pew! Ben Burt used the sound of a wrench hitting a high-tension wire.
Oh, okay.
And then synthesized it. And even if I wasn't using this toy, I would like, if I was playing with my figures, just constantly hit that sound.
Wow, and if you purchase this toy, you receive up to $3
Hey, man.
on the purchase of future toys.
Don't make fun of it. $3 was the price of a 1.5 figures because they were $1.99 each.
Here we go.
And
We're back in the old days.
I have everything, so I know every dollar counted because my father worked hard.
They even had a Death Star Commander sitting inside this transport.
I wish I had the new Death Star Commander.
It's funny because it talks about like prisoner compartments, but the way that the stormtroopers themselves are positioned into their little slots, they look like they're prisoners
Well,
too.
they're being moved and they're guarding. It's kind of like a half truck in the army. This would be the Imperial's version of a half truck.
R2-D2, where are you?
And you know what's funny? I thought I had seen this in some type of, like I said, the comic book, I'm pretty sure.
In a way, it's also like if you only own a couple of figures, you could use it almost as a collector case. You could hold, maybe half a dozen or
They
maybe...
were big on collector cases back in the day. I have the collector cases and I like them. The ones that look like suitcases, I like better. The ones that look like Darth Vader, C-3PO, they didn't hold the figures as well. I tried not to put too many into that, but most of mine are in their cards still, so I'm lucky. We talked last time about the Creature Cantina from Sears, which you received the blue snaggletooth and the 3 other cantina like Greedo and Hammerhead and Walrus Man. This one is the actual cantina playset. That was more like a diorama of the outside of the cantina.
Cardboard.
And cardboard stand up and little pegs for the feet. This one is more of the action playset. That's why it says action playset on the box. And it shows a kid with the orange background. It seemed to me most of the things that were Tatooine-ish were orange. Most of the things that were Death Star or Imperial-ish were red,
right, sandy,
purplish,
orange.
Something like that. They tried to keep a theme, and I love how the figures had their own backgrounds that highlighted, I don't think there was much of a pattern on that because Obi-Wan is yellow and so is Darth Vader. So I don't think it had anything to do. I just like the color, a little bit of color, as well as the picture of the character, and his name is in that matching color. But this, as you can see, this has the effect of a door, kind of like saloon doors, which the cantina did not have.
I remember assembling this because this is one of the toys I used to have, and those doors would be spring mounted with a little rubber band, and then rubber band would come off left and right.
Shoot across the room sometimes.
And then the door would just swing.
There was some other spring action underneath, so if you were going to shoot Greedo,
it would
he would
jump.
bounce.
It would get a little skip.
And of course it has a bar area, which is much smaller, but it's supposed to appear like one end of the bar and with some characters that never were made in the background. And Walrus Man is serving drinks that day. He must have been picking up some side work. They did not ever make a Woorer, which is the name given eventually to the bartender.
Right, but here they have Walrus Man being the bartender in the picture. Like you said before, they have creatures in the back, the band, and some other
artistic
patrons.
renderings, which isn't it odd they never, I do now have the newer version of the Finger and Dan's band, but it just seems odd that something so iconic, the song and those character heads, that they never made a figure. And then they would have sold, kind of like Stormtroopers. I know people who bought 10, 12, 15 Stormtroopers, and I don't even know how many I have. I do have a lot. I don't think I ever got up into those numbers. But with the Cantina band, you're easily selling 5.
Yeah.
And if you package them with the 5 different instruments, you could save package money, and just the same character could be the 5 different guys. And I think that's how they eventually did it.
That's how they did it the second time
I know
around.
I bought a 5-pack when it first came out, and then I think they eventually re-released them as individuals or something.
Well, here's some interesting little tidbits. This package here, you apparently purchased it at KB, and it cost you $9.99.
That's $10 for that. We established last time, and we'll go over it again for people who may be listening and had not heard the first one yet. Right now, if an average figure costs about $10, ironically, in what they call the vintage packaging. So if you want a Star Wars figure packaged in the same exact style packaging that I bought in 1978, it's going to cost you $10. It cost you $1.99, $2 basically, in 1978. So you figure the cost of the figures have gone up 5 times. Well, that's not ridiculous when you think about the cost of other things. They've found a way to make them better, much more detail, and many more accessories, sometimes cloth accessories, for only $8 more. However, now this set, it's not a giant box. It's a box slightly bigger than the Land Speeder.
It's like a shoebox size.
Yeah, it's about the size of a shoe. And I venture to guess that would be about $30 right now. Which is only 3 times more. Right. But maybe the artwork would be better, or maybe there'd be more detail or something.
Well, the construction would be completely different here. Like you said before, some of the tricks that you can perform is, in theory, Ben Kenobi slicing off the arm, that sequence of a Walrus Man or Dr. Evison, whatever,
Well,
whichever
Dr.
two.
Evison was the troublemaker, and Walrus Man
Gets-
sadly got the. I think they both got it, but I don't know if Walrus Man just didn't like him.
Yeah, he got
said,
caught in the middle.
Like
He
if
was-
you listen to Robot Chicken, he's like, no, I was saying I like your shirt.
He's collateral damage.
But-
But what they do is, like you said before, you flip a little switch here, and Ben Kenobi moves, and the other character flips up, and then on the other side they have a similar setup, which is supposed to be Han Solo's table with Greedo, where he also, you flip the little lever, he moves towards and clicks, and then when the clicking takes place, that's when your Greedo figure gets popped,
Yeah.
and he falls down. There's also lots of little pegs all over this plastics so you can mount your figures on, the little foot pegs, and different bases where you can kind of turn them a little bit. And the cardboard in the back, like you said before, it is drawings. It's not pictures. It's drawings of these other figures. They were originally never made.
Artist interpretation.
And you would have to assemble this yourself. I remember you have to line up the cardboard,
yeah,
slide
and
it
it had
in.
these little perforations
Yeah,
that you had to bend very slightly not to wreck to fit into the curved portion of the bar seat.
And it's the type of toy that you couldn't just like put it in a box in terms of
No.
pack. It had to be kept somewhere safe because it could all fall apart if you don't keep it in a nice, clean area. Here's the thing. I remember in the bottom, you would have to snap in all of these little footrests areas. It was part of the assembly. And the door, you would step on the first stone of the cantina and the door would pop open. It would release the springs so the door would go right in.
And it looks like the background has the correct amount of band members, which most people think are 5, but there's really 6 because there was a guy playing like a klezmer or something in the background. And it has the Duros, which may or may not be cousins of the Neomodians.
Yeah. Which is really the Cad Bane character, the Duro.
That's correct. Oh, so Cad Bane is a Duro, not a Neomodian.
No, he's a Duro.
Oh, so they're bad guys.
Yeah. Actually, there's creatures here that I don't even recognize.
Well, some of them do look like
Some of them
a
are.
smaller snaggletooth-ish kind of guy.
Yeah. It's interesting. Very interesting. What a shame they didn't. I don't know. They were making money, and I guess it was like, you know what? Empire's here. Let's move on to Empire. We got to keep cranking them out. And they didn't have enough time to continue.
So some more of our unsung second stringers. The Land of the Jawas was probably one of the most exciting junky play sets. Let's put it this way. Kenner found a way to make a plastic base, maybe a little bit extra side thing, and a cardboard background.
Okay. This is like the cardboard family almost. There's a whole wave of cardboardy mix toys.
So when you see this, you'll know what I'm talking about. This one is the Land of the Jawas action play set. Again, it's a picture of a sandcrawler. From the package, you can't quite tell what it's made out of. There's a plastic base with, looks like some of those same action kind of levers, things like that, and some figures, and a shuttle, like the escape pod. Now, the escape pod was the closest thing proportionally to the escape pod in the movie. It looks like the escape pod. They did model the outside of what launched from the blockade runner. But basically inside, all you did was open it up. There was a little sticker that you'd put a little sticker on, like a little control panel, and the droids would just stand in, or whomever you'd stick in there. But assuming you stuck C-3PO and R2 in there was enough room for the two of them, basically 2 figures, maybe 3 at the most. And it opened like an Easter egg. The top opened up, and you could take them in and out. But the base of the thing had a little lever that would make a droid go up into the cardboard sandcrawler, and there was a little cave that would allow a Jawa to hide in if they wanted to ambush R2-D2. And that little action levers that we talked about on some of the previous sets would make R2 bounce and fall over ultimately, or any other character, for instance.
Now, I have a question for you. These Sears exclusives.
I don't think this was a Sears exclusive. I think this was a regular store.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure this one was. The Sears exclusives were the Cantina with the figures, the Cloud City play set, a couple other, there was an Empire Strikes Back set from Hoth that had a similar kind of cardboard AT-AT background with 4 figures. And the Sears exclusives tend to tie in with a set of figures.
But were those something you could go to Sears and purchase on the spot, or you would have to order somehow through the catalog or something?
I would say they were mostly through the catalog, because Sears wasn't known for its big toy department. They had a toy department on and off, sometimes seasonally, sometimes not. I don't recall ever buying or seeing an exclusive on their shelves. That doesn't mean it wasn't there. But I think that was their way of generating excitement for their wish book, because obviously at that time they were the biggest retailer that did a wish book type thing. JCPenney would sometimes have exclusives. Theirs didn't usually tie in with Star Wars. There's where I remember some Star Treks, G.I. Joe's, some of the other. There may or may not have been a Star Wars one. I'd have to think about it, and I just don't recall. Maybe they got it first at JCPenney sometimes if it was an over-the-shelf type thing.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the coolest things I see about this Land of the Jawas playset is the little elevator that brings the droids into the Sandcrawler. I never had this, and I've never seen this at stores. I remember seeing the commercial, maybe live, maybe through YouTube, like we can see most of these commercials, and I'll attach, as usual, some of these commercials to our post so you guys could see these. But yeah, that little elevator thing is cool. And like you said, yeah, the Jawa is that same kind of spring mechanism. And it's also interesting when you see this packaging, when you get to see these figures brand out of the box, the displays they use and the sample ones, they're so fresh and in good condition. You're like, wow, nothing that I own looks like this anymore. It's like, oh, they used to have capes without any cuts or pieces missing. Now, it's interesting. They didn't use the vinyl Cape Jawa for these displays.
Well, I do believe that was a quick change. That's what makes it so rare. You can find sellers on eBay or various other conventions that will have reproductions. Some of them are really well made. Some of them will give you the card and everything. Just beware if you're planning on making a new packaged collection. Don't spend a lot of money on stuff that is considered rare like that unless you've got money to burn. Because
and make sure it's real.
There are some people who are unscrupulous and will sell you a repackaged regular old cloth Jawa with new vinyl cape.
Or they'll take a Ben Kenobi cape and recut it.
They're slightly different colors, supposedly. You will see it if you saw them side by side. You would be able to tell the difference. But like I said, you're best to not really buy a card collection unless you've got the money to spend if you made a mistake or you know what you're doing, because unfortunately there are people who will try to screw you. Next up in our unsung heroes, second stringers, is the Dewback, the Patrol Dewback.
I always wanted that one.
He basically is just a big green lizard with a saddle on him.
Which is what it was in the movie.
And you almost wouldn't even have seen him in the movie unless you saw the movie 5 or more times, because he's there in the background. He makes a noise. Now, people who've only seen the special editions will have seen him in a much more animated and a bigger presence in the film and a louder noise. They used just a head of him, just his head in the model, and showed a guy, kind of like they did with the Tauntauns and stuff and the Wampas in The Empire Strikes Back. It was just enough to establish that he was a creature and that the stormtroopers are using him to get through the desert in their quest to get the droids.
I could have swore that I read somewhere that originally they were going to have some other creature, some other sand creature. And it didn't work.
Talk of the crate dragons and stuff,
right?
Or
And
the
it didn't.
Or the banthas.
It didn't work out, or something happened. They couldn't use it, so they ended up just bringing this one along and putting it as a background, and using it in some shape or form. Now, interesting, which is something that they've later used when they make the Tauntaun, to create the effect of having a rider on top of the creature. Basically, what they do is they carve out a hole on its back.
Well, now I like this, and we may or may not have talked about that as far as Tauntauns go, but if we haven't, you can edit this out. It was a fantastic design coup to be able to make this. It would look like his legs, his hips were in the saddle, and they would make a side bag as if his legs were in the side bag. And since these figures had very little articulation, I believe most of them only had like 5 points, and the Stormtrooper, who was the primary rider, only had 4 points of articulation. It allowed him to be able to ride in the same manner as later on you ride the Tauntaun, by having a secret hatch that would spring open when you put a body in there. And then when you took the body out, the hatch would close so you wouldn't look like the Tauntaun's got a hole in his back or the Dewback or whoever it is you're riding. And it was great. It's a simple toy.
It's funny because the toy, from what I see here, has more articulation than I think the real prop.
Yeah.
You can move the head, you can move the legs. The real prop just sat there.
Basically just a head
I don't think
and
it
shoulders.
I don't think it could even blink.
Yeah, I'm not even sure the guy was the real Stormtrooper actor may have been sitting on like sawhorses, and it just made it look like it was sitting on with a blanket or something.
Cool. And this one is mint in box.
Now, the thing is about these, it was a little expensive when you think about it at the time. I believe it was anywhere from $6 to $9.99.
That's a lot of money compared to the Cantina.
If I recall correctly, the Landspeeder was about $5.99 or $6.99. I think the TIE Fighter and the X-Wing were about $9.99, $10 ballpark. And the Millennium Falcon, I think, was $19.99, maybe $24.99. I think the Death Star was $19.99, I recall, in 1978. So there was a clear price point, which all toys have it today. I'm a little more vague on what Hasbro does today with their price points, because sometimes they throw in extra figures to try to jump it up or make it rare, store exclusive, or Toys R Us will tack on money. But I know Legos will have price points, so if they're 900 pieces, they'll be more about $120.
Oh, yeah.
If they're high 80s, low 90s, they'll more like $80, $90. So these toys tended to keep within a price range. The most expensive toy, if I recall, might have been the AT-AT, which was, I think, about a 50...
60, 50,
I
something.
think it was like $49.99, $50, which made that, in 1981 prices when that came out, I could have that, or I could have every other toy that came out in that era. So I pushed off the AT-AT for quite some time. A really nice non-figure toy that I'm pretty sure George Lucas said he wanted made at the time. He wanted guns, I thought he said. Blasters.
Well, if you look at those little catalogs, they're there.
And they really did a nice job. It's a little kid size, but even as an adult, as I hold it, it has a decent proportion. I'm pretty sure Harrison Ford's prop gun was a little thinner, like a little shorter and longer on the point and shorter and like not as fat because the toy had to have a sound apparatus.
Right, and he also had like a wooden handle, I think, like a brown...
Well, obviously, we know they make these out of plastic, so ours have to be completely black. You know, they couldn't sell this toy today.
Oh, no, of course not.
In fact, I think they did eventually remake this, but it was like
painted white and green.
It was white and green or some nonsense. It has this little scope, which I don't know how the scope works because it's off to the side.
And I remember it has a trigger where you have to press a button.
There's a little button.
And then you hit the trigger.
Your middle finger holds the little button, and then you pull the trigger, and that would make that grinding
it was
laser
like
light.
Like.
No, it was just like a grinding sound. They eventually re-released them, I believe, with Empire stickers. I don't believe many people had this gun, if anybody else.
I have, and I think, I don't know if I showed you, and I have to re-find it again because I kind of lost it in my house. A gun that looks almost exactly like this, but it doesn't have the dual trigger thing, and it doesn't say Star Wars here. It looks like the sticker was removed, so I can't tell if it's a bootleg or it's just another version, maybe the Empire version or the Jedi version. I don't know.
Or somebody took the sticker off.
And it doesn't say Kenner anywhere either, so I'm like, what the hell do I have? Because this clearly says Kenner 1978. What does yours say?
General Mills Fun Group.
What year?
1978.
Okay, that's the same as this then.
Made in Macau. Now they only gamble in Macau.
Yeah.
I've been to Macau. I didn't see any figure factories. Almost last but not least in terms of the original Star Wars line of playsets is called the Droid Factory.
Oh, I love this one. I used to have that one.
The specialness about this particular toy is this was basically by Droid Factory.
Say it. I'm
going to make you wait. This,
hallelujah.
Depending on your points of view, this was either an EU type of thing or it was the inside of what was going on in the sandcrawler.
Yeah.
With the crane and the droids and the various things that the Jawas did. But the one rare, fantastic piece of this, almost to the same caliber as Blue Snaggletooth.
The elusive?
Three-legged R2-D2.
Yeah.
The only way you could have an R2-D2 that exhibited his third leg, if you will,
excuse me,
was to get the Droid Factory. And of the 5 different droids you could build, 4 of which didn't appear anywhere in anything. They might have been like on somebody's concept sheet somewhere. But the only way you could make the 3-legged R2 is this set. And it was pretty well done. The base, the legs, and the third leg were almost as perfect as they could be. And the head, instead of it being a clickable type, it connected with like this rubber stopper, which made it you could still turn it, but it wouldn't click.
Right. You couldn't add the third leg to your regular figure because it wouldn't fit properly. It would only fit on the R2 that came with this set. And it also included inside a gigantic, for its size, a large crane type of device that you would be able to pick up all these different droids. Now, you had the option of either building something like 5 different little robots, including the R2 robot, or, I believe in the instructions, you can take all the pieces and make like one big gigantic robot, which, like James said, these were not characters that you saw in the film. Who knows if they were ever concepts or anything, but it was part of the set. The other thing is that the base itself, you could attach all the parts to keep them somewhere, within your set so they don't just scatter everywhere. And what's interesting about this set, and this is the only one I owned, and this is the only one that at the time I had ever seen before, because this thing was apparently recycled once or twice more later with different color schemes and different names. But the original first one was the Droid Factory set. As we can see here on this particular box, another great bargain at the time, or at least for us now, $9.97, which kind of falls in line, like you said, within the Cantina playset, price variation. So it's kind of like a low-end playset value. Now, from what I understand also, the 3-legged R2 is something that people are always looking for on eBay, And, it's kind of like a little hard to find thing. If you're looking to buy the Droid Factory set, a lot of times they won't include it because of the fact that people want just the R2 with the third leg by itself. And like James also said, aside from the fact that it doesn't click, the proportions are pretty exact to the regular R2 that you would buy in terms of the size and the way that they decided they would color, all the different sticker that goes around the R2. I remember, it's a little loosey-goosey because it doesn't have the type of tight joints that the regular R2s would have. But like I said before, that third leg only works with the factory one because the actual hole, underneath R2 is longer. It's deeper that it can accommodate the leg, which is unusual if you think about it because they could have made, if they wanted, the other R2s, the regular R2 or the sensor scope R2 or even I think there's a Jabba's Palace R2 floating around there somewhere. They could have designed them similar to that.
And
so
R5D4.
Right, where you could insert that leg in there because all you need is to have the proper proportions to do that same type of action. But I guess this is kind of like, well, if you want it, you got to buy this set, which is not unusual for them to kind of get you to buy other stuff.
Some of these sets, they may have been available in some places, others not, and most people weren't thinking about them. They may have been re-released in some countries or some areas with an Empire logo on them or a sticker that said, see the Empire Strikes Back or something like that. I got all mine when they were released. One more thing was the collector case that looked like a suitcase that we mentioned briefly when we were talking about the C-3PO and the Darth Vader head. And these were little carrying cases that looked like a little suitcase or a briefcase that people would use back in the 70s. Not as nice as modern stuff, not all leather. But basically, you would open it up. It was basically just plastic and vinyl or leather or whatever. There's a little card that shows the trays with where the figures could fit. Some of the trays there were 4 trays that held the regular size, 3 3/4 inch figures. There were 2 on each tray of lower figures, so it would hold the Jawa and R2. But to offset, there was a larger above it for Chewie and Darth Vader, and eventually IG-88 and some of the bigger characters.
Didn't they also have the name stickers you could place in some places?
Well, let's look, Carlos. That one did. I still have the stickers there. And in those cases, they had enough room for what the card that I'm holding in my hand says, case holds 24 mini-action figures, collect them all. And what you'll see is the actual figures, including the cloth Jawa, not the vinyl Jawa, because by then he was the official guy.
And what you can consider a prototype Boba Fett.
On the back, it has all the second wave figures, including Boba Fett, which is clearly the Boba Fett that we never received. He's much darker gray, and his missile on the back, he's bent over slightly because the missile looks like it's bigger where it could launch. And you tell me if that doesn't look more like the Macquarie artwork.
Yeah, not only that, but that's also the picture that sometimes they would put on the action figure itself in terms of, get proofs of purchase, whatever, and mail in for XYZ. That looks more like the picture that they would have of him. What's interesting also is that part of this wave was not the blue Snaggletooth, was the exclusive Sears one, but in theory, it is a Star Wars figure.
These little case holders turned into a stage that looks like the deck plating on the Death Star. And if you turn it over, it would be like a little stage. They have pegs in where that was a big thing with them, the peg holders for the figures. I think because somebody must have said, but they might not stand up. And somebody probably said, look, we put a little hole and we put pegs in the various little toys. So each of the toys that have a play set involved have a lot of these peg holders, Millennium Falcon, the Land of the Jawas that we mentioned.
One of the most memorable things about this particular play case, or carrying case, whatever we want to call it, as far as I'm concerned, is that something, I don't know if I mentioned last time we talked about it, is that for some bizarre reason, when I was 8 or 9 years old, somehow it got into my head that if I bought this case, it came with the figures. And you should see the look on my face when I opened it and there was the pictures of all the figures, but guess what? No figures. But I still had the case and it was fun. I enjoyed it, but it was a little shocking. And that's why obviously they put on all these things, figures not included.
For dumb kids like you.
For stupid kids like you.
I'm going to show you, we may or may not have discussed it, Blue Snaggletooth and his little buddy Red Snaggletooth. Now, Blue Snaggletooth was only available through the Sears Cantina 4-pack. Mm-hmm. And that's the one we talked about with the background, that he was a diorama style. And he's very rare. And I'm actually surprised. I think the Gentle Giant line has made a replica in the large size scale that they've been recently putting out.
It's about $80.
Which is a nice little throwback. But I think Hasbro may have done a little goof for the fans, even though they did the little one.
They sold them as a set.
Yeah, and they're like cousins.
And it looks nothing like them.
They're kooky cousins.
Now, let me tell you something you probably don't know, because I've recently been looking into snaggletooths, especially the blue snaggletooth. Apparently, there's a variation in the blue snaggletooth, and that is if you look at the right foot of whatever snaggletooth you happen to own that's blue, there is a manufacturing defect, if you will, that a good portion of them have it, and some of them obviously don't, and that is an indentation on the toe area. It's a little dent in the foot.
Is it a good dent or a bad dent if you have it?
You barely notice it.
But do I have it?
No, you don't have it.
So is that one more rare?
I think the more rare one is the one with the dent. So
because mine I bought right away. The day it came in the wish book, I ordered it.
Yeah, it says back here, Hong Kong, 1978. Yep. The other thing I found out through another one of these podcasts that I listened to is that the snaggletooth, when you really think about it, not only the blue one, but
the red one looked nothing like him
But
either.
the red one, not only does he look nothing like the one you see in the movie, you actually
He's actually three-quarter. There's actually a third version, and what's his name really?
I don't know, but what I'm trying to get to is that I believe one of the manufacturers that came up with this design of the figure, his personal logo for this artist is the belt buckle on the snaggletooth, which carried onto both figures. Well, they actually have a picture of the guy's business card, and the business card has that logo, which is the belt buckle. And I guess it was one of these little in-jokes that, somebody put on their own little thing on it. But like I said, this guy's in really good shape. There's very minor wear and tear on him. And if you go into eBay, you see all kinds of you see stuff that looks like it's been sitting in the grass for 30 years. But yeah, this is great. It's a shame they never really made him in a card because it would have been a nice one. And, I look forward to, you never know, maybe when they get around finishing the current vintage line, they'll make a blue snaggletooth in a card. That'd be nice to have. But technically, I know he technically doesn't fit into the 24 case. Well, this brings us to the end of part 3 of our Vintage Star Wars Kenner toy special. I'd like to thank James for allowing us to visit him in order to be able to see all these vintage toys that most of us don't have access to. And we will invite you to join us again next time on Geekfest Rants when we continue with more vintage toys or different topics or commentaries. Until then, thank you for listening, and we'll see you here next time on Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Han Solo!
Escape pod landing. Where am I?
It's the new Star Wars Land of the Jawas that you put together. Action figures sold separately. You can move the action lever and make the Jawa capture R2-D2.
R2? Are you all right? What are they doing to you?
You can raise the elevator and make R2-D2 disappear into the sandcrawler.
Hang on, R2. I'm right behind you. Me too.
Kenner's new Star Wars Land of the Jawas. Action figures each sold separately.
Stop.